We're playing with descriptive statistics this week. And it's the idea of describing data. So what is data again? So data is information. Talked about that in the last chapter. And there are many kinds of information out there. The two kinds of information that we're going to play with are categorical, which sometimes is called qualitative. Or quantitative. Which would be numerical data. So categorical data could be things like, I'm a male, right? Gender, we have male, female, other. This is the idea of gender. And if we randomly pick a person, their gender will vary. They'll be male, they'll be female, or maybe they identify some other way. We're used to thinking about variables in math that are numbers, but a variable could be some quality that a person, place, or thing has, or a category we could put people, places, or things into. Another example is eye color. There are a bunch of different eye colors. Common ones are blue and brown, green, hazel. I believe eye doctors have 20 eye colors categorized, and there's, I think, 7 that are common or 9 that are common eye colors. It could be some kind of status. For example, my daughter is a junior in high school. Versus senior, or freshman, or sophomore. So anytime we group, anytime we have a quality that we can attach to something, that's generally going to be what we call a categorical variable in statistics, and that variable can have different values, and the value is some kind of word or phrase. Other kinds of data would be numerical. For example, age could be one. Height in inches. Anything we can measure or count. And we have to learn how to summarize this data, because generally when we collect data, there's a lot of it and it can be overwhelming. So for example, there's the spreadsheet I have from that average student survey that y'all filled out for me. And there are, let's see, in the age column, at the top, and then get to the bottom. $304 numbers. How do we make sense of those 304 numbers? Well, we do things like say, well, what's the average age? What's the minimum age? What's the maximum age? So anytime we try to summarize a variable, whether the variable is quantitative, like age, or categorical, like gender, we can't just look at a huge list of these values. We need to figure out a way to collapse it down, to make it more digestible, to make it more understandable. And we're going to do that in a couple of ways. Yeah. Good afternoon, Alexis. Welcome. So our goal this week is to take these different kinds of variables, categorical or quantitative, and summarize them. And we're going to summarize them in 2 ways. We're going to use charts to do that. And we're also going to use summary statistics. so that with a graph and a few numbers and a few words, we can tell somebody what we think the data is like for a different variable, what the values are like. So first, we're going to play around with categorical data. So example of categorical data from here, I'm going to pick on, let's say, eye color, and I'm just going to take a sample. There's a random sample. We talked about randomness last week. To current page, please. A random sample of eye colors from students who took my survey. So we're looking again at categorical variable. The variable here is eye color. And generally, when we start working with statistics are going to appear in a table. That table is sometimes called a data frame, and each column represents a variable. Each row represents a record or individual. So here I have a bunch of records for that here, and I can see there's somebody selected their blue as their eye color, or blue, brown, green, hazel. How many different ones do we have here? So I'm just going to start summarizing this. And we have blue occurs how many times? 1, 2, 3 times in this one. So I'm just counting them. Count is also known as frequency. And then we have brown. And how many browns do I have? 1, 2, 3, it looks like. And then I have green. I'm just trying to summarize what are the unique ones. Green occurs 4 times, I believe. Somebody sees me make a mistake, let me know. Hazel. 2, it looks like. We got blue, green. Enough people said something like blue, green that I thought it definitely should be a category. And in the 20 listed by eye doctors around the world, I believe there was something like that. Let me see one of those. We got hazel, we got green, we got brown, we got green. Okay, so let's see, double check. Did I count correctly? I'm just going to get a total on this to make sure I counted right. 3 and 3 is 6, 4 is 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so there's 13. What do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so I got it. This is what's called a frequency table. Frequency, it's supposed to be a Y there. So that's one way to summarize the data. So now you might say, well, what's the difference between the frequency table and that list he has there? Well, I had to work a little bit to count that there were 4 greens, for example. And so the frequency table, again, is a summary. Generally, your data set's not going to be 13 long. It's going to be much bigger. It's going to be hundreds or thousands of numbers in them. Now, that was a bit of work. It took me a couple of minutes, a few minutes to make that summary table for this small one. Now, the original data set back here, it has, what did I count? 300 and something values, 307 records that people put in there, I think it was. I don't want to count those by hand. I want the computer to count them for me. So there's a couple ways we can make that happen. Now, I made a summary table already for this. I'm just going to grab that, blow this up a little bit. Didn't work. There we go. So here is my summary table for the whole group of data. I'll show how I did that in a sec. Let's add that to the current page. I'll put that over here. So anytime you count up the different amounts each value of the variable can have, that's what we call, again, a frequency table. So again, that's one kind of summary we can do with categorical variables. Now, often we like to see that in a picture. So to see that in a picture, what we would do is one of two things. we could either make columns for each of those, and the count would be how tall the column would be, or we could turn that into a pie chart. Right? You could do that by hand. I'm going to choose not to here because a spreadsheet is a great tool for doing so. So if I wanted to make a table for the eye color on my spreadsheet, I would select that what I want to play with. Now notice I selected the letter for that column that highlights everything in the column. That's only safe to do if there's nothing else in the column but those values. Now there's going to be a bunch of blank rows underneath, but if there was other stuff that wasn't eye color under that, that would be a problem. So if you're ever in doubt, then click on the top one, and then on the keyboard, Control-Shift-Enter will zip you to the bottom, or at least to the first blank cell. And I'm at row 308, so I think I'm at the last cell that has data. So once I select the data, then most spreadsheets have an insert chart option. Excel does something similar, and it's going to throw a chart in. And interesting, it made a histogram, which is inappropriate here. I'll explain histogram later. Huh, that is very strange. All right, we want, say, maybe a column chart where the computer will look at all of the things I gave it and try to count them. Now, notice it's trying to count eye color here as a thing, instead of a label. So it's a little confused about that, so I'll have to fix it in a second. But otherwise, it counts how many times did black occur, how many times did blue occur, and green, and brown, and green. Blue, green, brown, green, gray, hazel, and then unknown. So again, with data, although for small data sets, we can do this by hand, looking at them and counting them, but the better way to do it is on a spreadsheet. And so this is called a bar chart. And let me just clean this up a little bit. Let me take that down. Here we go. And the data range, B1 was the label eye color. So I'm just going to say, hey, don't look there. There we go. Steal this. Close that. And copy the chart. All right, so new page. This is what's called a bar chart. And the bar chart is based on a frequency table. So I'll put both of them in here. It's not going to let me copy and paste. Let's try that again. This. Add to front page. And the associated frequency table is right here. And sometimes, for whatever purpose we're doing this kind of thing, we like the frequency table and the bar chart, but typically we just want the bar chart. So I made this frequency table by asking the computer to count things for me, but the computer will just do that on its own without having that table. So something just to point out here again is I didn't make the bar chart based on this table right here. I just selected the raw data, and the spreadsheet says, oh, I can do this. I can count them for you. So just to demonstrate that again, back here. You can see that what's highlighted here are those eye colors, which is separate from my table, my frequency summary table here. And so they're two different things, but they're related. All right, a couple things about this. When you make a graph, you should make sure it's well labeled. When a spreadsheet first makes a chart for you, there's going to be crappy titles all over the place. And you can easily edit them. But I just want to point out, it called it histogram of count. Not sure why it did that. That's not a correct title here. This would be just eye colors of students, maybe. A human has to step in and make a better set of titles. Now, at the bottom here, it for some reason put the count there because it wasn't sure what to call them. And it called it that because it was counting how many times it saw each of those names in the list there. So I could just call this down here. This is the list of eye colors. So we'll just call that eye colors. Now, for example, black, 2 people said they had black eyes and 84 people said they had blue eyes. These numbers, the heights of each column, those are technically called frequencies. So what's the frequency of people with blue eyes in the survey? We would say the frequency is 84. Why do we say the frequency is 84? Because that's what we counted right here. A frequency is just a count. So I could label this axis here, that vertical axis, frequency. But then my mom would say, what's frequency again, Gary? So that's not the best name. All right, what does frequency mean? It means count. What are we counting? We're counting students. So I think a good name for this right here would just be number of students. And whether we're using a spreadsheet like Google Sheets or Excel, or maybe if you have a Mac, you might use numbers. All of this stuff is changeable on a chart when it makes one for you. You just got to find the right place to change it. Now, instead of making a bar chart, we could have made a pie chart. So I'm going to go back and ask the computer to do that for me. So to do that, I just highlight my data. Now, since I know only eye color is in that column, I'm just going to highlight eye color. And then I'm going to say, insert me a chart, please. And it's going for histogram again. Interesting. I want a bar chart. Sorry, a pie chart. And let's see, it is charting unknown, hazel, gray, green, brown, black, blue, and green. It looks good, except it has a shitty title again. Now here, there's really only one thing I need to put a title for. So I'm just going to double click where it says counts and write something a little more descriptive, like eye color of students. And then there is my chart. Now, there's lots more things we can do in the customize section. I'm going to play with customizing other charts. Bar charts and pie charts are pretty straightforward. Really, all you have to do once you get them started is change, for example, a title. Other things people might like to change is the colors selected are kind of random for each one. So maybe you'd want to pick a color that's more appropriate for each of the eye colors, right? You could easily go in there and change each color individually. That's totally doable. I'm not going to do that right now because I'd rather talk about statistics than aesthetics. All right, let's get a screenshot of this sucker. And to current page, please. All right, shrink that down a little bit. All right, so what do we got here so far? We're trying to figure out how to summarize categorical variable. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. We can summarize with a bar chart. We could summarize with a pie chart over here. And I mentioned 2 big ideas for summary statistics. 1, we use charts and graphs to summarize. 2 is we use what are called statistics. Last week, I mentioned a statistic is any calculation you make based on data. What kind of statistics are there for a categorical variable? So categorical statistics. Well, the first one we have is frequency. What does frequency mean? It just means to count. Frequency, just count. Now, a lot of times what we do is when we then take those counts and we restate them as a fraction or a percentage. So you can see here, it's kind of hard to read, but Hazel, it's got a 13.6% here versus in my chart, Hazel has a 42. So 42 of the individuals that responded said they had hazel eyes. That turns out to be 13.6%. And that's called a proportion. And a proportion is just the frequency for that item divided by the sample size. And we can check that in a minute. Sometimes that's stated as a fraction, 1/2, or as a percentage, in this case, 13.6%. For the hazel there. Next thing is the idea of mode. Mode is the most frequently occurring value. Some data will not have a mode because there's multiple values that have the same high count. A data set could have a single mode, like in this case, we would say the mode is brown eyes because it has the largest number of individuals that selected brown, the highest percentage, the highest count. So here we do have a mode. Data can be what's called bimodal, two modes. There's two things that have the highest count. And as far as categorical data goes, that's about all we can do. We can make a bar chart out of it as a summary, which is based on a frequency table. We can make a pie chart out of it, which is also based on a frequency table. And then values we can use to summarize our frequencies. How many of each were there? What percent of each were there? And which one happened the most? And that's about all we can do with categorical variables. There's one slight twist you could make with the bar chart, and that would be ordering the bars from the biggest one to the smallest one. That's what's called a Pareto chart. And sometimes that is a nice thing to have. So just a side note, a special type of bar chart. It's called a Pareto chart. And the Pareto chart is just a bar chart starting with the highest frequency and then descending to the lowest frequency. Most spreadsheets don't do that by default. You would have to reorder your frequency table to make that happen. So I'll just show a quick example of that. And then that's about all we can do with categorical. Quantitative is much more interesting. So let's see, let's go back here and get that out of the way. And to make that happen here, I would have to modify this frequency table because Google don't know how to make it do that without making a frequency table first. I'm just going to copy that, bring it down here to an open space. Before I paste it, just something to point out here. There's 306, 307 entries here in my table in each, so 306, 307 rows. I didn't individually go and look at those and figure out what were the unique things people entered there. I had the computer count those for me. So there's a function called unique. And I just said, hey, use unique, look at this list, tell me what the unique words in the list are. And then it spit out, okay, these are the ones that were unique. Which is slightly true and slightly not true. If I look at the eye color from the original data set, people entered things like dark brown. There's misspellings of brown in here. There's misspellings of green. Some people typed a space at the end of a letter, and the computer sees that space and sees it as a different word because of that. Some people typed blue-green. Some people typed green-blue. Some people did green space blue, green dash blue, green slash blue. So actually there were more like 30 different colors listed in there. And I had to go in and clean it up. Okay. Now, you never clean up the original data set. You always make a copy. So I copied it in here before I cleaned it up. So this is my what's called scrubbed data summary. I had to scrub the data, clean it up first. So I used the unique function to find the unique ones, and then I whittled it down to some more common names and got rid of misspellings. Then there's another thing called count if, where I said, hey, go look at all of those different colors and only count it if it says blue. Only count it if it says green. Okay? And if you want to learn more how to use count if, I can show you another time. So that's how I created this table. Again, I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it down here. And because it used formulas to make that table there, when I copy it over, I'm going to have to paste the values only, otherwise it'll be a mess. And then I can do something like sort this by the frequency. To do that, you highlight the whole group, sort range. You got to get to the advanced sort so you can tell it it's got a header, and you can choose which header to sort by. Like here, I want to do frequency, but Z to A. Once it's in order like that, then I could make what's called a Pareto chart. So are there some packages out there, some apps that automatically make a Pareto chart by just pushing a button? Yeah, but Google Sheets doesn't do it and Excel doesn't do it. You'd have to specially go out and do it. So since I did all that work, let's actually insert the Pareto chart here. And when you select the chart wizard, insert chart in either Excel or in Google, it's going to guess at the chart you want. And sometimes it guesses right and sometimes wrong. So I want not that, but a column chart. And there's not much difference between this column chart and the one I have back here, except that I just resorted it with the tallest one first and the next tallest second. But otherwise, it's the same data, just represented in a slightly different way. So again, this is called a Pareto chart because it is in descending order of frequencies. Let's give it a better name. And then it picked labels of unique color and frequency for each axis. That's okay. Again, I prefer to avoid technical names like frequency because some people might not understand it. So a better name instead of frequency there would be, say, number of students would be a better name for that. But there's nothing wrong with putting frequency there. All right, let us move on. Quantitative variables.